The world woke up to astonishing news. The United States, using military force inside another sovereign nation, struck the capital of Venezuela, captured its president, Nicolás Maduro, and brought him to the United States to face charges in an American court. U.S. officials announced the operation publicly, saying that Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, are now in U.S. custody after being removed from Venezuela and flown to New York. President Donald Trump even said that the United States would run Venezuela temporarily to ensure a transition and reopen its oil sector. This dramatic event has raised urgent questions across the globe. Is it lawful for one country to arrest the president of another? What gives the United States this right? Why is the U.S. doing this? What are its motives? And what impact could this create for the future of international relations? In this video, we are going to answer all these questions. So let's start. To begin with, under international law, the arrest of a sitting head of state by forces of another country inside the president's own territory is generally considered a violation of sovereignty, a foundational principle in the United Nations Charter. Article 2.4 of the UN Charter prohibits nations from using force against the territorial integrity or political independence of another state, unless there is consent, a UN Security Council mandate, or a legitimate claim of self-defense. Legal experts have already stated that without one of these exceptions, a foreign military operation aimed at capturing a president is inconsistent with international law. This is why many global institutions and governments have called the action illegal or at least a serious breach of international norms. So does that mean the U.S. has no legal basis at all? The United States government, including senior officials who briefed lawmakers, has emphasized that Maduro was already the subject of a long-standing criminal indictment in the Southern District of New York on charges including narco-terrorism, cocaine trafficking, and conspiracy related to machine guns and destructive devices. These charges date back years and were rooted in U.S. federal law enforcement decisions. Moreover, American authorities had placed increasingly large rewards for information leading to Maduro's arrest, indicating the seriousness with which they viewed the case. But even if someone is indicted, arresting a head of state abroad by force is not something U.S. domestic law can simply authorize unless the foreign government consents or an international mandate exists. That's because criminal jurisdiction, even over drug trafficking, does not extend extraterritorially without cooperation, extradition treaties, or international legal mechanisms. In this case, Venezuela's government has rejected the U.S. narrative entirely, insisting Maduro remains its legitimate president and that the military operation violated Venezuelan sovereignty. This is why critics, including members of the U.S. Congress, legal scholars, and United Nations representatives, strongly argue that the capture may constitute an act of aggression, the highest category of international crime as described in foundational legal texts such as the Nuremberg Principles. Without approval from the UN Security Council or consent from Caracas, the legal footing is deeply contested. So we come to the question of why this happened. What motivates the United States to undertake such a dramatic and controversial operation? The official explanation from U.S. authorities has been that Maduro presided over a narco state, a regime intimately tied to drug trafficking organizations, including the so-called Cartel of the Suns, accused of facilitating massive cocaine shipments into the United States and beyond. U.S. prosecutors have described Maduro as a central figure in a corrupt network that not only trafficked drugs, but used violence, bribery, and state organs to sustain illicit trade. These allegations were part of the basis for the indictment, and American leaders argue that Maduro must be held accountable for these crimes. At the same time, the geopolitical dimension cannot be ignored. Venezuela sits on some of the largest proven oil reserves in the world, and U.S. officials, including President Trump, openly stated that part of the plan after Maduro's ouster would involve managing Venezuela's oil industry and exporting its resources. This raised concerns about economic motives entwined with security objectives, especially since the U.S. has long been deeply interested in regional energy dynamics. Moreover, the political context inside Venezuela matters. Maduro's government had become increasingly isolated internationally, grown authoritarian at home, and faced widespread accusations of election fraud, including a contested election for his third term in 2025 that many nations did not recognize as legitimate. Before the capture, the U.S. and its allies had already imposed sanctions, and some Western governments recognized opposition figures as Venezuela's rightful leaders. Taken together, U.S. motives appear to be a mix of law enforcement claims, geopolitical strategy, and pressure to influence the political future of a neighboring state, a combination that is inherently controversial on the world stage. So, what impact might this create? First, the direct impact is immediate regional instability. Venezuela's Supreme Court swiftly moved to designate Vice President Delcy Rodriguez as interim president to maintain continuity, but the legality of this, in light of a foreign military intervention, is something Venezuelans and international jurists will debate for years. Globally, the operation has already triggered sharp divisions among world powers. Some nations, like Argentina's libertarian president, celebrated the move as a liberation from authoritarianism. Others, including Russia, China, Iran, and many Latin American governments, denounced it as unlawful aggression and a dangerous violation of sovereignty. These reactions reflect broader geopolitical fault lines between the United States and other major powers, and the event is likely to become another flashpoint in great power competition. Second, from a legal and diplomatic standpoint, this could set a precedent, for better or worse. If a powerful nation can unilaterally use force to arrest a sitting head of state, other governments may feel either emboldened or threatened. International law could be weakened if exceptions become the rule, eroding norms designed to protect sovereign equality and territorial integrity. Many smaller or less powerful states see the incident not as justice served, but as international law overwritten by might. The United Nations has been pressured to respond, and debates about sovereignty and intervention will likely dominate diplomatic forums for months. Finally, the human impact on Venezuela itself cannot be overstated. Venezuelans have already endured years of economic collapse, political repression, and mass migration. A sudden foreign intervention, especially one that disrupts leadership from the outside, could lead to internal power struggles, uncertainty, and the risk of conflict if competing factions seek control. Some Venezuelans oppose Maduro violently and welcome change. Others see it as foreign invasion and an affront to national autonomy. In the end, the arrest of Nicolás Maduro by the United States, if confirmed and upheld, will become a defining moment in 21st century geopolitics. It raises deep questions about the limits of legal authority, the power dynamics between states, and who gets to enforce justice in a world where law and power are not always aligned. Whether this act heralds a new chapter of accountability or a troubling erosion of international norms will depend on how global institutions, regional actors, and future administrations interpret and respond to it. This is not just a story about one man. It is a story about the rules that govern our world and what happens when those rules collide with power.